Hi everybody, welcome to Asher's Boys Love Story. Please enjoy this video.
The photo was an accident. Eli said to the stranger, "Could you take one?" He had no idea the man was Varenthia's most feared crime lord. No idea that scent would crack 6 years of suppressants. By morning, his face was on that man's wallpaper. Still thinking about the scent. Curious about the uncensored scenes I had to cut out? The full explicit editions are waiting on Patreon. Links right there in the description. Comment your location below and hit subscribe to never miss a story. Now let us begin. The first thing you needed to understand about Eli Voss was the suppressants. He had been taking them since he was 17 years old, the day his designation came in, and his father went very quiet in the way that men of his generation went quiet when the world handed them something they did not know how to accommodate. Not rage, not cruelty, just a silence that lasted 3 days and then became a set of practical arrangements, a prescription, a standing order at the pharmacy, a conversation that was never fully had because the silence had said most of it already. The suppressants flattened his pheromone signature to something negligible and kept his biology on a low, manageable setting, the way you turned a radio almost all the way down without turning it off completely. He could still feel things. He was still an omega in every technical sense, but the suppressants kept the loudest parts of that quiet, and quiet was what he needed to function in a world that was not particularly designed for what he was. He had grown up in Salder, a city 3 hours north of Varenthia where everyone knew everyone, and the knowing had nearly killed him. Not literally, but the specific slow suffocation of being known as something people found inconvenient had its own quality of damage, and by the time Eli was 23 and working his 4th year at a small design firm in Salder, he understood that the damage was accumulating faster than he could manage it. His supervisor, an alpha named Renner, had found the suppressants in Eli's desk drawer during a search Renner called routine, and Eli knew was targeted. The senior partners made several decisions that were technically illegal and practically invisible, and Eli received a settlement small enough to feel like an apology and large enough to feel like a door closing. He packed a single bag, chose a city large enough to lose himself in, and took the first train south. Varenthia was exactly what he needed it to be. 3 million people, a sprawling harbor, an old quarter that smelled of salt and old stone, and the specific quality of a city that had been accumulating history for 400 years without much caring whether anyone approved of the accumulation. He found a room in the Corvon district, found work within 2 weeks at a small print studio called Ardent Press, and began the careful process of building a life that fit the shape of who he actually was rather than the shape other people preferred him to occupy. He took his suppressants every morning with his coffee. He kept his scent flat and his biology quiet. He started going to the waterfront in the evenings because the harbor light was extraordinary, and he had bought a second-hand camera and was learning, slowly, to trust his own eye. He had been in Varenthia 8 months when he took the photograph that changed everything. It was a Thursday in early autumn, the kind of evening where the light did something specific over the harbor water, a particular angle of late gold that made the city look briefly like a painting of itself. Eli had finished a long week of precise work on an exhibition catalog and left the studio at 7 feeling something that resembled contentment, which was still new enough to be worth noticing. He walked the promenade with his camera and photographed the water and the boats and the particular compression of the jetty at low tide, and then he turned and looked at the horizon and had one of those reckless moments that 8 months of cautious living had not entirely suppressed, the moment where he wanted to be in the frame rather than behind it. He had noticed the man on the bench before he approached him. It would have been difficult not to. He occupied space differently from other people, with a quality of stillness that was more present than movement, a patience that registered as physical weight. Black hair, shoulders that suggested architecture, a jaw that was doing something specific in the golden light. He was looking at his phone with the focused economy of someone who processed information the way other people breathed. And beneath all of that, even from 15 meters away, even through the suppressants, even through the salt wind off the harbor that should have scattered everything, there was a scent. Eli's suppressants had been doing their job reliably for 6 years. They had flattened his responses through 4 years at the design firm, through the settlement meeting with the senior partners, through every crowded tram and every difficult day, and every alpha he had encountered in the course of ordinary life. They had never failed him. They had never given him a moment's trouble. The scent hit him from 15 meters, and something in the carefully managed architecture of his suppressed biology went very, very still in the way prey goes still when it senses something large and patient nearby. Black cedar, cold iron, something underneath both of those that had no clean name, but that his omega instincts recognized with a precision that 6 years of pharmacological management had apparently not erased. He approached anyway, because the light was extraordinary, and he was tired of being afraid of things, and because some reckless part of him that the suppressants had never quite reached decided that this specific moment called for forward movement rather than the retreat he would have chosen 8 months ago. "Could you take one?" he said, holding out his phone. "The light is doing something, and I want to be in it." The man looked up. His eyes were the color of deep water in low light, gray with something darker underneath, and when they landed on Eli, they did not move the way most people's eyes moved when a stranger approached. They settled. They stayed. They looked at Eli with a quality of total attention that was its own kind of pressure, and underneath that attention, the scent was stronger, and the carefully managed quiet of Eli's biology was making sounds it had not made in 6 years. He took the phone. He stood and moved to find the angle without being asked, adjusting for the light with the instinct of someone who understood composition, and he took 3 photographs. He handed the phone back. Eli looked at the screen. The photographs were extraordinary. The light was exactly as he had hoped, and his own expression in them had a quality he had not known his face was capable of producing, something open and unguarded, caught in genuine feeling rather than performing it for the camera. "The light suits you," the man said. He sat back down and returned to his phone as though the conversation had concluded. Eli walked home. On the tram, he posted the best photograph to his account with no caption and looked at the other 2 and thought about the quality of attention the man had brought to taking them, the way he had moved to find the right angle without being told what the right angle was. He thought about the scent. He told himself the scent was irrelevant. He told himself his suppressants were working fine, and that what had happened 15 meters from a bench on the waterfront was simply the wind doing something unusual with someone's cologne. He almost convinced himself. He did not know that the man on the bench had been watching him for 11 minutes before Eli approached. He did not know that the man had noted the camera, the way Eli moved when he was photographing something, the specific quality of his concentration, and had felt something happen in his chest that he was still in the process of identifying. He did not know that the man had looked at Eli's account before Eli had reached his apartment, had looked at every photograph posted across 8 months, and had set the waterfront image as his wallpaper before midnight. He did not know the man's name was Caden Rowe. He did not know what that name meant in Varenthia. He did not know that the scent that had hit him from 15 meters, black cedar and cold iron, was the natural pheromone signature of an alpha, who had not needed to suppress or manage anything in his biology since the day he designated at 16, and understood immediately and without confusion exactly what he was and what he was capable of. He did not know that the suppressants, which had never failed him in 6 years, had never encountered a pheromone signature quite that specific. He just knew that he was still thinking about the scent when he fell asleep, and that the photograph on his account was the best image he had ever made of himself, and that the man who had taken it had understood exactly what the light was doing without being told. Caden Rowe came to Arden Press the following Tuesday. Eli was in the back studio when Serge called him to the front, and he came out wiping ink from his hands, and when he saw who was standing at the counter, he stopped walking for a fraction of a second that he corrected immediately, and that Caden registered with complete precision. The suppressants were doing their job. Eli could feel them doing their job, that familiar pharmacological flatness that kept his biology on its low, managed setting. But the scent was there again. Cedar and iron, less than 3 meters away, and the flatness had a different quality than usual, the quality of something working harder than it normally had to work. "The waterfront," Eli said, keeping his voice level. "The waterfront," Caden agreed. "I have a project I'd like your help with. Photographic prints for a private residence. Your work is what I need. You've seen my work. Your account is not set to private." "It has 63 followers." "64 now," Caden said. They sat at the small meeting table near the front window, and Caden laid out the commission with enough specificity to make clear he had thought about it, and enough genuine interest in Eli's input to make clear the specifications were a starting point rather than a constraint. Eli listened and asked questions and noticed, in the careful way he noticed things, that Caden's pheromone signature was present even across the table and that his suppressants were handling it, but not without effort, like a filter working against a stronger current than it was built for. The fee Caden named was considerably beyond the studio's standard rate. Eli did not react to the number, except with a small nod. "I'll need 2 weeks of preliminary shooting," Eli said. "That's fine." "You'll want to review the selects before production." "Yes, we can meet for that." Eli looked at him. The alpha across the table was watching him with that quality of total attention, settled and patient, and Eli's omega biology was doing something quiet and insistent underneath the suppressants that he was choosing not to examine directly. "Can I ask how you found the studio?" Eli said. "A photograph with the logo visible in the corner of the frame," Caden said. "You posted it 6 weeks ago." "You've been following the account for 6 weeks." "Yes." Eli looked at him. "Before the commission." "Before the commission," Caden confirmed, without any indication that this disclosure required management or apology. He said it the way he seemed to say everything, as a plain fact that existed regardless of whether it was comfortable. Eli picked up the contract draft Caden had brought and read it with the same attention he gave to proofs, carefully and without performing the reading. When he finished, he set it down. "I'll take the commission," he said. Caden nodded, and they arranged the review meeting, and he left, and Eli stood at the front window for a moment after the door closed and watched him walk down Vale Street with that quality of deliberate, unhurried movement, and became aware that his suppressant was still working harder than it usually did, and would probably be working harder than usual for the rest of the afternoon. He went back to the studio and told himself this was a professional arrangement, and nothing else. He was a careful person. He had been a careful person since 17, had built his entire adult life on the architecture of careful. The suppressants were part of that architecture, the foundation of it, the thing that kept the loudest parts of his biology from creating complications he could not manage. He had taken them every morning without missing a dose for 6 years. They had worked. He had functioned. He had moved through a world full of alphas, including difficult ones, and his biology had stayed on its low-managed setting and caused him no trouble. None of that prior experience had involved a pheromone signature like Caden Rose. He found out the name 5 days into the commission, when he was in the old quarter photographing the architectural details of a centuries-old arcade, and a man approached him, politely and without aggression, and said he worked for someone who had noticed Eli's presence in the area and wanted to verify that Eli was who he was and that he was there for a legitimate purpose. The man was beta, calm, professional, and gave the name of his employer with the ease of someone accustomed to the name carrying its own explanation. Caden Rowe. Eli had lived in Varenthia for 8 months. He had not spent those 8 months in ignorance of the city's power structure, partly because he was a naturally attentive person, and partly because Varenthia was the kind of city where the power structure was visible if you knew how to look. He knew the name. He knew what it meant. He knew that Caden Rowe operated a network that sat beneath the city's legitimate economy and made it function in ways the legitimate economy preferred not to examine, that he controlled the port infrastructure and several distribution channels, and had arrangements with enough of the city's official bodies to make direct interference impractical. He knew the name the way you knew weather patterns, as a fact of the environment you were moving through. He had not known, when he handed his phone to a man on a waterfront bench, that the man was that name. He had not made the connection from the photographs because Caden Rowe did not appear in photographs, or if he did, they did not circulate. Not. He had made the connection now, standing in the arcade of the old quarter while the beta man waited politely for his response. And he was processing it with the careful attention he processed things, which meant filing it accurately rather than reacting to it before he understood what he was reacting to. "Thank you," Eli said. "Please tell him I'm here for the commission." The man nodded and left. Eli went back to photographing the arcade. The commission was real, regardless of who had arranged it. The prints were real. The work was real. And the question of what exactly Caden Rowe wanted with photographic prints of the old quarter and the harbor was something he would answer by paying attention, rather than by assuming. He was good at paying attention. The 2 weeks of shooting produced more than 300 photographs, from which Eli spent a focused Friday evening, reducing to 60 selects, each chosen with a precision that reflected genuine judgment rather than volume. The pre-dawn harbor piece was among them, taken at 4:47 in the morning on a day when his alarm had gone off at 4, and he had gotten up without hesitation because the light at that hour over the harbor water had been doing something in his imagination for 2 weeks, and he needed to know if the reality matched it. It did. It exceeded it. The review meeting was on a Saturday morning at Ardent Press. Caden arrived exactly on time. He stood at the light box and looked at each of the 60 photographs with the same quality of total attention he brought to everything, moving slowly, spending real time. Eli stood slightly to the side and watched him look, and noticed, carefully, and without letting himself react to the noticing, that his suppressants were working in that particular strained way again, filtering the cedar and iron of Caden's pheromone signature with the quality of something processing a larger input than it was designed for. He took his suppressants every morning. He had taken them this morning. They were working. He was fine. "This one," Caden said, stopping at the pre-dawn harbor piece. "What time?" 4:47. "You went out at 4 in the morning." "The light doesn't negotiate," Eli said. Caden looked at him. Something moved in his expression, a fractional adjustment in the careful composure. "No," he agreed. "It doesn't." They went through all 60 together. Caden had genuine opinions and expressed them without performing expertise he did not have, which Eli found more interesting than either deference or false authority. When they disagreed, Caden listened to Eli's reasoning and sometimes changed his view and sometimes maintained it, and the whole process had the quality of a real conversation between two people taking the work seriously. When the selects were finalized at 17 pieces, Caden looked at Eli with those gray deep eyes and said, "Dinner. Tonight. Not as a client." Eli looked at him. He thought about the name he had learned in the arcade. He thought about the suppressants working harder than they should. He thought about the 63 followers and the fact that this man had been one of them for 6 weeks before he walked into the studio. He thought about the photograph on his camera and what it had felt like when the man behind the lens actually looked. "I don't know who you are," Eli said. "Beyond the name." "I'm aware of that. Most people establish something about themselves before asking someone to dinner." "I'm telling you I'd like to have dinner with you," Caden said. "That's a more significant disclosure than most things people offer." Eli looked at him for a moment. "Where?" Caden named a restaurant in the old quarter that Eli had walked past many times. 7 o'clock, Caden said. 7 o'clock, Eli said. He arrived at 7. Caden was already there, which Eli had not expected from a person of his position, in which he filed his information. They were seated at a corner table with Caden's back to the wall, which Eli also filed. The restaurant was quiet and expensive and had the particular quality of discretion that came from genuinely not needing to advertise. The dinner was 3 hours. They talked about the city and photography and what made images work, about the old quarter's architectural light and the harbor's different registers across seasons. Caden talked about Varenthia with the knowledge of someone for whom the city was not a backdrop but a living thing with its own logic, and Eli talked about Salder without talking about the reasons he had left it, and Caden did not ask about the reasons, which Eli noticed and appreciated. Through all of it, for 3 hours across a corner table, the pheromone signature was present. Cedar and iron, consistent and unmistakable. And Eli's suppressants were doing their job, but the effort of it had a texture he could feel. A faint, persistent hum underneath the pharmacological flatness, like a string being held under tension. It was not meant to sustain indefinitely. He was a careful person. He had been careful for 6 years. He would remain careful. They walked out into the old quarter lane at 10 o'clock. The cobblestones held the day's warmth in diminishing degrees. At the corner of Arvas Lane and the main road, Caden stopped. "There is something I want to tell you," Caden said. Eli stopped walking. "The photograph you asked me to take on the waterfront. It is my phone wallpaper. It has been since that evening." Eli looked at him. "That photograph of me?" "Yes. Since that evening." "Yes." Eli considered this information. The lane was quiet around them. From somewhere in the old quarter, a restaurant sound drifted past. The cedar and iron was at close range now, 3 feet of cool autumn air between them, and his suppressants were handling it. We're definitely handling it. "Why are you telling me this?" Eli said. "Because it is true," Caden said, "and I don't spend energy pretending things are not true." Eli looked at him for a long moment. He thought about 6 years of careful. He thought about the suppressants that had never given him trouble until a waterfront bench in early autumn. He thought about the way this man had stood and moved to find the right angle without being told, and then handed back a photograph of Eli's face that was the most honest image he had ever seen of himself. "I took a photograph of you this morning," Eli said, "in the studio when you were looking at the harbor piece. You didn't know I'd taken it." Caden looked at him. "I'm not going to post it," Eli said. "I know. But I've looked at it several times today." The corner of Arvas Lane was quiet. The city went on around them in its evening rhythms. Caden was looking at him with that total settled attention, and Eli's omega biology was making its quiet, persistent sounds underneath the suppressants, sounds that were not about danger. Sounds that his body made when it had identified something and decided without consulting him that the identification mattered. "Dinner again," Caden said. "Next week." "Next week," Eli said. He took the tram home. He sat in the back of the nearly empty carriage and looked at the photograph of Caden on his camera, at the fraction of unguarded expression in a face built for containment, and he thought about the suppressants working harder than they should, and about the scent that had hit him from 15 meters on a waterfront promenade, and about the name he had learned in the arcade of the old quarter. He thought about careful. He had been careful for 6 years. He was going to remain careful. He was also going to have dinner with Caden Rowe next week, and the part of his biology that the suppressants had never quite reached was already counting the days. The prints took 3 weeks to complete. Eli oversaw every stage of production himself, with a precision that Sayers described as intense, even by his standards, and Tam watched him work and said once, quietly, that the harbor piece was the best photograph of Varenthia he had seen in the 12 years he had lived there. Eli and Caden had dinner twice more during the production, each time at the quiet old quarter restaurant with the corner table and the owner who used a shortened name and the 2 men near the entrance whose placement was not accidental. Each time Eli took his suppressants in the morning. Each time, across the table, the cedar and iron was present, and the suppressants worked in that strained particular way, and Eli paid attention to the conversation and the man having it, and told himself the strained quality was a minor pharmacological fluctuation that would regulate itself. The second dinner was when Caden told him the true shape of what he was. He had asked, and Caden had answered, not with apology and not with arrangement, but with the flat directness he brought to everything. The organization that sat beneath the city's legitimate economy, the ports and distribution networks and financial channels, the 12 years of building something his father had left half-built, the reason the authorities preferred not to try dismantling it. He laid it out with the same quality of attention he gave to the select photographs, carefully and without performance. Eli listened. He looked at his wine glass. He looked at the two men near the entrance. He thought about the name he had learned in the arcade and the shape it had taken in his understanding across 3 weeks of commission work and 2 dinners. "Does it involve hurting people?" he said. "Leverage and economic pressure rather than violence," Caden said. "Violence is expensive and attracts attention we prefer not to have." "Have you personally?" "No," Caden said. One word, flat and certain. "That is the line my father crossed repeatedly. It is why he died the way he did." Eli sat with this. He thought about the quality of the man across the table, the way he had simply sat down on the floor beside Eli after the first incident. But that had not happened yet in this telling, had it? He thought about the filing cabinet with a note. But that had not happened either. He thought about what he actually knew from direct experience, which was that Caden had come to the waterfront to exist in the one place where no one knew his name, and that he had taken 3 photographs of a stranger with genuine care for the light, and that he had told the truth every time Eli had asked him a direct question, without managing the truth into something easier to receive. "You went to the waterfront because no one knows you there," Eli said. "Yes. And I gave you a photograph and posted it, and 64 people could now see your face." Something moved in Caden's expression. "You have 63 followers. The probability of identification is low." "You're the 64th, Eli said. "You identified it immediately." The corner of Caden's mouth moved. It was not quite a smile and was more than nothing. "Fair point," he said. Eli looked at him. He thought about careful. He thought about the suppressants that were doing their job right now, across this corner table, working against the cedar and iron with that particular strained quality. He thought about the fact that his biology had not felt this specific kind of strain in 6 years, had not felt it once, and had chosen to feel it now in response to a man who was, by any reasonable accounting, one of the most dangerous people in the city. He thought that some things could not be managed by being careful about them, and that he had spent 6 years being careful and had ended up alone in a new city with 63 followers and evenings at the waterfront and the slow rebuilding of a self that had been made small. "I'm not afraid of you," Eli said. "I know," Caden said. "You walked up to me on a public bench at dusk when your instincts were clearly registering something about me that most people register and walk away from." Eli looked at him. "My instincts register quite a bit about you," he said carefully. "I take suppressants. They're managing it." The shift in Caden's expression was small and significant. His eyes moved over Eli's face with a new quality of attention, not greater than before because it was already total, but different in focus, reading something he had perhaps suspected and was now confirming. "Managing it," he said. "Yes," Eli said. "They're working fine." A beat. "They're working harder than they usually do." The silence between them had a new texture. Caden looked at Eli across the table with those gray, deep eyes, and something in his own biology was doing something that Eli, with his suppressed but functional omega senses, could detect even through the pharmacological flatness. A deepening of the cedar and iron, a subtle shift in its quality, from ambient to directed, an alpha pheromone response, mild, controlled, but present. Eli picked up his wine glass and looked at it. "This is a professionally complicated disclosure," he said. "Yes," Caden agreed. "I should not have said it." "You were being honest," Caden said. "I have no objection to honesty." Eli looked at him. He thought about the suppressants working harder than they should. He thought about a biology that had been quiet for 6 years and had chosen this specific man to stop being fully quiet about. He thought that perhaps some things in a person's chemistry were not pharmacological questions, but the other kind, the kind that did not have a clean answer and could not be resolved by adjusting a dose. Next week, Eli said. Dinner. Next week, Caden agreed. He took the tram home and sat in the back and thought about the disclosure he had made across the corner table, and the way Caden's pheromone signature had shifted when he made it. That deepening from ambient to directed, barely perceptible, controlled the way everything about Caden was controlled, but present, aimed. He was a careful person. He had been careful for 6 years. He was going to need to be more careful than that. The third dinner was when Caden told him about Sever. He said it the way he said things, plainly and without arrangement. A man inside the organization who had been building toward a kind of influence Caden had been systematically preventing. A man who had become aware of Eli and was assessing him as a variable, something that could be used to create leverage or disruption. He also told Eli, in the same plain tone, that there were 2 people maintaining a discreet presence in the Corvan district near Eli's building, that this had been in place for 10 days, and that he should have mentioned it sooner. Eli absorbed this across the corner table. Your people are watching my building, he said. Yes. They know what I look like. They have a photograph. Caden paused. The waterfront one. Eli looked at him. Something that was not amusement, but was close to it, moved through him. Your security team is using your wallpaper as an identification reference. They are, Caden said, with the quality of someone acknowledging a fact about themselves without embarrassment. Their names, Eli said. I want to know their names. Caden looked at him. The fractional thing happened in his expression again. Dort and Vasily. Dort is taller. Vasily reads between checks. I can introduce you if you want. I want, Eli said. He walked home from the tram stop that night through the Corvan district streets and did not try to identify Dort or Vasily, because they were good enough at their work that he would not succeed, and trying would be an exercise in his own anxiety rather than anything useful. He walked past the familiar shop fronts and the small gallery that always had its lights on late, and the corner where the night market set up on weekends, and he thought about what it meant to be watched by someone who had told him he was being watched, about the difference between being managed without your knowledge and being given the information you needed to decide. He thought about careful. He thought about the suppressants working harder than they should for 3 weeks now, across commissions and dinners and one corner conversation in a lane off the old quarter arcade. He thought about the particular quality of Caden Rowe's attention, the total settled patience of it, the way it had located him from 15 meters on a waterfront promenade and had not looked away since. He went upstairs to his apartment. He sat on the edge of his bed and took his suppressants for the morning early, which he had never done before, and thought that this was either very sensible precaution or evidence that the precaution had already become insufficient. He did not examine which of those it was. He turned off the light and lay in the dark and listened to the Corvan district doing its nighttime things outside the window, and thought about a man sitting at a corner table whose pheromone signature had shifted, barely and deliberately, from ambient to directed. Aimed. At him. He was still thinking about it when he fell asleep. The prints were delivered on a Friday afternoon. Caden came to Arden Press exactly on time, moved through the 17 pieces with that quality of total attention, and when he reached the pre-dawn harbor photograph, he was still for longer than he had been with any of the others. This one, he said. I know, Eli said. 4:47 in the morning. The light doesn't negotiate. Caden turned and looked at him. They were standing close to the light box, closer than the task strictly required, and the cedar and iron was at a distance now where the suppressants were working with that particular strained quality, and Eli was very aware of the 3 feet of studio air between them. I want to show you the penthouse, Caden said, where the prints will go. I'd like your advice on placement. That's a reasonable part of a commission, Eli said. Saturday morning, Caden said, if you're available. Saturday morning, Eli said, He was available. He had been available every time Caden asked him for something, which was a pattern he was noticing and which his carefully managed biology was noticing alongside him with considerable interest. Caden left. Eli stood at the front window and watched him walk down Vale Street and thought about Saturday morning and Penthouse placement and the suppressants that had been working harder than they should for 3 weeks now, without failing, without giving him a moment of actual loss of control, just the persistent strained quality of a system operating at the edge of its capacity rather than comfortably within it. He thought about Careful. He thought, standing at the window of Ardent Press on a Friday afternoon in early autumn, that he had come to Varenthia to be no one for a while, and that he had taken a photograph of a stranger on a waterfront bench, and his biology had done something that 6 years of pharmacological management had apparently not prepared it to handle, and that he was now looking forward to Saturday morning in a way that had nothing to do with print placement. He thought that some threads, once you pulled them, did not stop. He went back to the studio. He had work to finish. He finished it carefully, the way he did everything. And if his mind returned several times to the corner table and the cedar and iron and the fractional shift from ambient to directed, he managed that too, the way he managed most things. With attention and patience and the quiet discipline of someone who had learned that the things worth having did not accommodate your reluctance, the suppressants were working. He was fine. Saturday was 4 days away. He was counting. Saturday arrived the way things you have been counting toward always arrived, with the particular quality of a moment that had been anticipated long enough to have its own weight before it even began. Eli took his suppressants at 6 a.m. with his coffee and stood at the kitchen window of his Corvin apartment, watching the district come awake, and told himself the early dose was about maintaining consistency. He had told himself a number of things over the past 3 weeks that had a similar quality of being technically true and substantially insufficient. The penthouse was in the northern quarter, a building of dark glass and clean lines that rose above the old city's roofline without apology. A man met Eli in the lobby, introduced himself as Wren, and took him up in an elevator that moved with the quiet efficiency of expensive engineering. The elevator opened directly into the penthouse. Wren stepped back. Eli stepped in. The space was large and quiet and full of light. North-facing windows from floor to ceiling, which a photographer noticed immediately, the quality of it diffuse and consistent, the kind of light that did not perform. Furniture chosen for quality rather than statement. Very little on the walls, which was why the 17 prints were going to matter significantly in this room. The space had the quality of something waiting to be completed. Caden was standing at the far window with his back to the room, looking out at the northern quarter below. Black hair, the particular set of his shoulders that Eli had been photographing in his mind since a waterfront bench in early autumn. He turned when Eli entered. The cedar and iron hit Eli at full room distance, and the suppressants registered it immediately with that strained working quality that had become familiar over 3 weeks. Familiar did not mean managed. Familiar meant Eli knew precisely what his body was doing and had developed no additional capacity to stop it from doing it. "Good morning," Caden said. "Good morning," Eli said. "The light in here is extraordinary." "North-facing," Caden said. "I chose the unit for it." Eli looked at him. "You chose your penthouse for the light." "The light and the sight lines?" A pause. "Primarily the light." Eli set down his bag and took out the printed placement guide he had prepared, scaled floor plans with suggested positions for each of the 17 pieces marked and annotated. He had spent Thursday evening on it. He had told himself he was being professional. He had been being professional. He had also been filling the hours between Friday afternoon and Saturday morning with something that was not counting. They went through the placement together, moving through the room with the prints propped against walls in proposed positions and stepping back to assess and adjusting and reassessing. Caden engaged with each decision genuinely, which Eli had come to expect, the absence of performance and the presence of actual attention. They disagreed twice. Both times Eli explained his reasoning and Caden listened, and once changed his view and once did not, and both times the disagreement had the quality of a real conversation between two people taking the same problem seriously from different angles. The cedar and iron was present throughout, consistent, working on his suppressants with the patient persistence of something that had learned the rhythm of the resistance and was not concerned about the timeline. When the last piece was positioned, the pre-dawn harbor photograph on the long north wall where the light would find it at the same hour the image had been made, Eli stood back and looked at the room with its 17 prints in their places and felt the particular satisfaction of work that had landed correctly. "It's right," he said. "Yes," Caden agreed. He was standing slightly behind Eli and to the left, looking at the same wall, and his voice was close enough that Eli could feel the warmth of it more than hear it. Neither of them moved for a moment. Eli turned. Caden was closer than the room required, not crowding, not pressing, simply occupying space at a proximity that was different from the professional distances of the studio and the dinner tables, and the cedar and iron at this range was doing something specific to the strained quality of Eli's suppressants, something that was less like the filter working harder and more like the filter becoming aware of its own limitations. "You should know something," Eli said. His voice was level. He had been practicing level for 3 weeks. Caden looked at him. "When my biology responds to a pheromone signature the way it's been responding to yours," Eli said, "it means something specific. It's not a general response. It's a compatibility signal. Omega biology doesn't work that way with everyone. It's selective." He paused. 6 years of suppressants, and I have never had this particular problem with anyone. Caden was very still in the way he was still when he was processing something he had decided to give his full attention. "You're telling me your biology has identified a compatibility?" "I'm telling you my suppressants have been working at approximately twice their normal effort since a waterfront bench in early autumn," Eli said, "and that this is diagnostically significant." "And you're telling me this now," Caden said, "in the penthouse, Saturday morning." "I'm telling you this now because I've been careful for 6 years, and I would like to make one decision that is not about being careful," Eli said. "And I'm telling you in the penthouse on Saturday morning because you asked me to come, and I came, and here we are." The silence between them had the quality of something that had been building for weeks and had arrived. Caden looked at him with those gray deep eyes, and the cedar and iron deepened in the room, the way it had deepened across the corner table when Eli made his first disclosure. That shift from ambient to directed, but closer now and less controlled, the alpha pheromone response that was the biological answer to what Eli had just told him. "I've been looking at your photograph every day for 6 weeks, Caden said. "That is also diagnostically significant." Eli looked at him. Something in his chest that the suppressants could not reach moved in a way he recognized as the feeling of something being decided at a level below the decision. "I need you to understand something about what I do," Caden said. "I can tell you what it is, and I have told you what it is. What I cannot tell you is that it carries no risk for the people I am close to. It does. I cannot manage that risk entirely. I can manage it substantially, and I do, and I will, but the residual exists, and you should choose with full knowledge of it." "Sever," Eli said. "Sever's being handled. There will be others. There have always been others." He held Eli's gaze. "I am telling you this because you deserve to choose with the real information, rather than the version that is easier to say yes to." Eli thought about the suppressants working at close range, the strained quality he had lived with for 3 weeks. He thought about 6 years of careful that had produced a life that was functional and solitary. He thought about a man who had told the truth every time, including the truths that made the choice harder. "I know what you do," Eli said. "I've known for 3 weeks. I've been choosing every time I came to dinner." Caden looked at him. "I'm still here," Eli said. The remaining distance between them closed the way things closed when both people had stopped pretending they were not going to close it, with a quality of mutual arrival, rather than one person moving toward the other. Caden's hand came to the side of Eli's face with the focused deliberateness he brought to things that mattered. Not tentative, not hurried, the touch of someone who had decided and was acting on the decision without performance. Eli's hands found the lapels of Caden's jacket and held. The kiss was not brief and not gentle in the way of things that had been waited through a long time, that had been held at careful distance while the pressure built, that arrived finally with the full weight of everything that had preceded it. Cedar and iron everywhere. The suppressants doing something at the edges of their function that Eli noted distantly and did not address, because some things in a person's chemistry were not pharmacological questions. When they separated, Caden kept his hand at Eli's face, and Eli kept his hands at the lapels, and the room was quiet around them, and the north light was doing something specific on the pre-dawn harbor photograph on the long wall. "The suppressants," Caden said. His voice was different from its usual register, lower and less managed. "Working," Eli said. "Barely." Caden looked at him. Something in his expression had the quality of the fraction Eli had photographed in the studio, the unguarded openness that lived under the composure, except now it was not a fraction. It was the whole of it. "I need you to tell me what you need," he said. "I will not assume." Eli looked at him. He thought about 6 years of managing his biology to prevent exactly this kind of situation. He thought about the fact that his suppressants were current, were this morning's dose, were functioning. He thought about what he wanted and what his biology wanted, and the fact that after 6 years of managing the distance between those two things, they were pointing in the same direction. "I need to not be careful for a while," Eli said. What followed was not reckless. Caden was constitutionally incapable of recklessness, and Eli had spent 6 years learning to be present in his body without being governed by it. The combination produced something urgent and deliberate at once. The north light moved across the penthouse floor in its slow morning arc. The suppressants held their managed line. Eli's omega biology moved through its registers with the quality of something finally allowed to speak after 6 years of careful quiet, and what it said was not complicated and not small. Afterward, the room was very still. Eli lay in the particular quiet of his own body settling, the suppressants doing their work, his biology at a register he had not visited in a long time. Caden's arm was across him. The cedar and iron surrounded everything, and at this proximity, it was not a strain on the suppressants. It was simply what the air smelled like. "The photograph," Eli said after a while. The wallpaper one. You've had it 6 weeks. 7, Caden said. "As of yesterday." Eli turned his head to look at him. "You've been counting." "I count things," Caden said. "It's useful professionally." Eli looked at the north light on the ceiling. Something that was related to amusement, and was also warmer than amusement, moved through him. "I took your suppressants early on Wednesday," he said. "That was the first time I've ever done that. I told myself it was consistency." Caden was quiet for a moment. "It wasn't consistency." "No," Eli agreed. "It wasn't." They lay in the quiet and the city light, and Eli thought about the things that had built this particular Saturday morning, the waterfront bench, and the commission, and the dinners, and the corner of Arvas Lane, and the disclosure across a corner table, and the way Caden's pheromone signature had shifted from ambient to directed and kept shifting until the distance between ambient and directed had become irrelevant. He thought about the suppressants, which were doing their job. He thought about his omega biology, which was doing something that was not its job exactly, but which felt, in the particular quiet of this room, with this person's arm across him, like the right thing to be doing. He thought that some threads, once you pulled them, did not stop. He thought that this was not a bad thing. The problem announced itself the following Tuesday. Eli was at Ardent Press reviewing proofs when Saoirse came to the back studio with an expression he recognized from 4 weeks earlier, the tight, careful expression of someone who had received information they had not been prepared for. She handed him an envelope. Inside was a legal document, cease and desist, fabricated proprietary claim, the same mechanism as before. But this one had a secondary element that the previous one had not. Attached to the legal document was a photograph, not of Eli, of the Corvan apartment building where he lived, with a handwritten note on the back that said simply, "Fragile things break." Eli read it twice. He set it on the light table. His hands were steady. He had been made small before by people who found his existence inconvenient, and he had learned in Salder that the specific cold of a direct threat was different from the ambient cold of being unwanted, and that he knew how to function in both temperatures. He called the number on the card Dort had given him. Dort answered in 2 rings. "There's a document at the studio," Eli said. "Legal claim, same construction as before, and a photograph of my building with a note. I'll send images." "Send them now," Dort said. "Don't go home tonight. Vasily is already on Vale Street. Stay at the studio until you hear from us." Eli sent the images and sat in the back studio and finished the proof review because the proofs needed finishing, and because sitting with his hands in his lap while he waited was not something his nervous system benefited from. Tam came in at some point and did not ask questions, which was one of the things Eli valued about Tam, who understood when the quality of someone's presence indicated that questions were not what was needed. Caden called at 4 in the afternoon. His voice was the controlled version, the flat professional register, which by now Eli understood was not absence of feeling, but a specific way of managing feeling that did not compromise function. "Are you all right?" he said. "Yes," Eli said. "Don't go to the apartment tonight. There is a room here. Ren will come to the studio at 6. "The building photograph," Eli said. "It's Sever." "Yes." A pause. He's accelerating because he knows the timeline on his position inside the organization is ending. This is not a sustainable strategy for him. It is an escalation designed to force a response that gives him something to use. "He wants you reactive," Eli said. "Yes." "Don't be," Eli said. Caden was quiet for a moment. The quality of the silence was the one that meant he was giving something his full attention. "I'm not going to be reactive," he said. "I'm going to be thorough. Those are different things." "How long?" Eli said. "Days," Caden said. "Not weeks." Eli looked at the proof sheet on the light table. He thought about fragile things break. He thought about what Saver understood, which was an Omega in a new city with a small job and a Corvan apartment. He thought about what Saver did not understand, which was that 6 years of Careful had not been built on fragility. It had been built on the knowledge that the world did not accommodate what he was, and that functioning within that fact required a structural resilience that did not need to announce itself. He had not broken in Salder. He was not going to break now. Ren arrived at 6. The penthouse was lit warmly against the early dark. Dort was in the lobby. Vasily was on the second floor with a novel, and gave Eli a nod that communicated professionalism and the quiet warmth that had developed between them across weeks of harbor walks and photography lessons. Caden arrived at 7, later than usual, with the quality of someone who had been managing a compressed amount of activity in a short window. He looked at Eli when he came through the door, and the controlled expression did the thing it did when it was managing something that wanted to be less controlled. He crossed the room and put his hand on the back of Eli's neck, brief and grounding, and said, "You're all right." "I told you I was," Eli said. "I know." He kept his hand there for a moment. "I needed to verify." They ate in the penthouse kitchen, and Caden talked about the operational picture in the flat, precise terms he used when being informative rather than managing. Eli listened and felt, in the quality of being told rather than shielded, the same thing he had felt at the third dinner. This was what honesty felt like from someone for whom it was a practice rather than an occasion. Sever was removed from the organization on a Thursday. Caden told Eli with the finality he had learned to read as complete and not preliminary. The man who had taken the building photograph was made irrelevant through channels Eli understood without needing their specifics. The legal claim was withdrawn within 48 hours. Eli went back to the Corvin apartment on Friday. The familiar rooms, the camera equipment on the shelf, the photography books by the window, the coffee maker with its slow opinions. He thought about what this apartment had been 8 months ago and what it was now. It was still his. The building photograph had been designed to make it feel contingent. What it had produced instead was cold clarity. He knew the names of the people watching the street. He knew the number to call. He knew that the thread connected him to someone who operated on thoroughness rather than reactivity. He called Caden. "I'm back at the apartment," he said. "Good," Caden said. A pause. "Are you staying?" "Tonight, yes," Eli said. "I have a proof review tomorrow morning." "Saturday evening," Caden said. "Saturday evening," Eli agreed. He stood at the Corvin apartment window and looked at the district doing its Friday evening things and thought that this was still where he lived, and that the choice felt different than it had 8 months ago. Less like the arrangement of a person who had nothing else, and more like the deliberate preference of a person who knew what the alternatives were. Saturday evening arrived. The penthouse had its quality, the north light failing into the warm glow of lamps, the 17 prints on the walls, the pre-dawn harbor photograph doing something specific in the lamplight that was different from the day's version, but equally right. Caden made dinner. This was new information about him that Eli was in the process of adding to the accumulating file, that he cooked with the same focused precision he brought to everything else, not elaborate. Exactly right. They ate at the kitchen table, which was smaller and less formal than the dining table, and talked about Sever's removal and the operational stability that followed it, and about a new photography project Eli was considering for the studio's own collection, and about the harbor in winter, which Eli had not yet experienced, and whether the light would be worth the cold. "The light is always worth it," Eli said. Caden looked at him. The expression had the open quality that Eli had been cataloging since the studio photograph, the unguarded version that appeared more frequently now, that no longer required a fraction of a second to surface. "Yes," Caden said, and the word landed somewhere adjacent to the photography conversation, and adjacent to something else. After dinner, they went to the window and looked at the city the way they had looked at it from the waterfront bench, in a comfortable parallel quiet. And Caden said, "I want to ask you something." Eli looked at him. "I want you to stay," Caden said. "Not for the commission. Not because it's practical or safe or because the situation with Sever makes the Corvin apartment feel contingent. I want you to stay because this is where you want to be. I want to know that you're choosing it." Eli looked at the city below the window, the 17 prints behind them, the harbor at 4:47 in the morning on the north wall. He thought about the waterfront bench and the suppressants and the corner of Arvis Lane and Sever's note and the phone call to Caden that had not been a call for rescue but the specific act of telling someone where you were. He thought about 6 years of careful and a man who had asked him to choose with full information rather than the easier version. "I started choosing when I came to the third dinner," Eli said. "After you told me about Sever. I came anyway." He turned from the window. "I've been choosing every time since then." Caden looked at him with those gray, deep eyes and the open expression, and something in them that Eli recognized, having spent weeks photographing it in his mind, as the specific quality of a person who has been alone in a particular way for a long time and has found, without expecting to find it, the thing that ends that particular aloneness. He stepped away from the window and took Eli's face in both hands and kissed him the way he kissed him now, with the full, deliberate attention of someone for whom this specific person was not a variable or a development, but a fact, established and not going to be unestablished. Eli had his hands in Caden's black hair, and the cedar and iron was everywhere. The suppressants did their steady work. His omega biology did the other thing alongside them. The specific and fundamental response that 6 years of careful pharmacology had been keeping at its minimum setting, and which had found, in the accumulated weeks of a commission, and 3 dinners, and a note that said fragile things break, something the minimum setting was not adequate to contain. He did not try to contain it. He stayed. What staying meant, in the months that followed, was the north-facing penthouse with its 17 prints and its good light, and a kitchen where 2 people with opposite coffee preferences made breakfast in a parallel rhythm that required no negotiation. It meant Vasily at the harbor with his second-hand camera, and Dort with his 2 coffees, and the professional warmth of people who had noted what mattered to their employer and decided accordingly. It meant the waterfront bench in the evenings and the comfortable quiet of 2 people who had stopped needing to fill the space between them. It meant the suppressants, which Eli continued taking every morning, working now at a register closer to comfortable than strained. His omega biology, having been given room to choose and having chosen, had arrived at something like equilibrium. Not absence, not suppression. The difference between a system working against itself and one that had stopped needing to. It meant Caden, who came home in the evenings and told Eli the real information and asked his opinion, and sometimes changed his mind and sometimes did not. It meant, on a Wednesday morning in late winter, when the harbor light was doing something extraordinary through the penthouse windows, Eli standing at the glass with his camera, and Caden behind him with his coffee, looking out at the same light, and Caden saying, "The 64 followers." "Considerably more than that now," Eli said. The photography account had grown in the months since. The harbor images and the old quarter studies and the winter light on the city's northern face, attracting the attention of people who recognized the particular quality of seeing that Eli brought to his images. "The original 64, Caden said, after you posted the waterfront photograph, when I found the account." Eli lowered the camera and looked at him. "What about them?" "I spent some time looking at the account before I followed it," Caden said. "The images, the way you looked at things." He paused. "I'd been going to the waterfront for 3 years because it was the one place in Varenthia where I didn't have to be anything in particular. And then I looked at your photographs and thought that this was someone who looked at the world the same way, like it was worth looking at." Eli looked at him. The winter light was doing its thing on the harbor water outside the window, and the pre-dawn harbor print was on the north wall behind them, and the coffee was getting cold in Caden's hand. "You followed the account," Eli said. "Yes. For 6 weeks before you came to the studio." 7, Caden said. "I was counting." Eli raised the camera and took the photograph before Caden could rearrange his expression. The gray deep eyes doing the thing they did when they were looking at something they had decided mattered. The morning light on his jaw and his black hair, and the quality of stillness that was not absence of feeling, but the precise containment of a great deal of it. Eli lowered the camera. "Large format," Caden said. "I know," Eli said. He posted it that evening with one word as the caption. Found. The account's comments filled within the hour. Eli read them and thought about a man on a waterfront bench who had taken 3 photographs of a stranger with care for the light and handed back the most honest image Eli had ever seen of himself. He thought that some things were so true that following them was not really a choice. It was just what you did when you had finally stopped being afraid of what they were going to cost you. The harbor went on below the window in its winter register, the city lights coming on in the early evening. Caden's hand was at Eli's lower back, steady and present. The suppressants were doing their job. Eli's omega biology was doing the other thing alongside them. Eli leaned back slightly into the hand at his back, not asking for anything, just making the contact deliberate, saying yes to the weight of it. Caden's arm came around him properly, and they stood at the winter window while the city came on in its patterns, and the photograph of Caden's open face accumulated its quiet responses from people who saw something in it they recognized without being able to name, which was what the best photographs did. The thing they recognized was this: that a man who had built an empire in comprehensive solitude had spent 7 weeks following a photography account because something in the images reminded him of the only place in the city where he could simply exist. That a man who had suppressed himself for 6 years had handed a stranger his phone on a waterfront promenade, and the stranger's scent had cracked something open that 6 years of careful management had been working very hard to keep closed. That both of them had been counting, in their different ways, toward the same thing. And that the thread, once pulled, had not stopped. The harbor went on. The light negotiated nothing and waited for no one and was extraordinary when you were willing to be there for it. They were willing. They were there. If you enjoyed this story, please like, share, and subscribe. It truly helps the channel grow. My beautiful angels, tell me your thoughts in the comments. Which part stayed with you the most? Comment your location and let me know. I love reading every single one of your messages. Until the next story, take care of yourselves.